actually never saw that video before. Good to see you guys. I hope you guys are enjoying the conference so far. So I want to take a moment to really sort of connect the dots a little bit, express to all of you what this process over the last 23 years has been all about. Actually, people ask me, what is Latitude and what does that have to do with home ownership and the mission of NAHREP and so forth? Believe it or not, there is some plan behind what seems to be something that is a little bit crazy. I started the organization with a gentleman by the name of Ernie Reyes 23 years ago. And at the time I was a mortgage broker in San Diego. And my thrust for creating the organization was somewhat self-serving in the sense that I was a small business professional who felt that I didn't necessarily have access to the information, the mentorship, the capital that I needed to make my business larger, to make it more successful. And I thought it would be really great to have a network that those things existed, where we could find people who can help us advance our business interests. My partner, Ernie Reyes, who passed away about 7 years ago, he had a very interesting background in politics before he became a real estate broker. He was the chief of staff for Leon Panetta. Panetta went on to be the defense secretary and chief of staff of the White House, but before that he was a congressman in Northern California, and Ernie was his chief of staff. So Ernie saw it from a political lens, and I saw it from an entrepreneur and business lens. And when we started the organization, the timing was great. It was 2000, and it was the very first year that Hispanics had become the largest minority group in the United States, just surpassed the African American community. So there was a lot of buzz about that, a lot of interest. And so when we started NAHREP, there were companies and there were public officials that were interested in partnering with us in some capacity. So that was really great. And the organization grew very quickly. And within 5 years, we had our first national convention in New York City. There was 1,800 people there. And it seemed like nothing could stop us at the time, that we were just going to get bigger and things were just going to get better for us. And then 2008 happened. And we all remember 2008, right? Everything that we thought could never happen in our industry was like happening every week. Companies were going out of business. Banks were being seized by the federal government. Fannie and Freddie were under government receivership. It was a scary time. And it changed our industry permanently. And NAHREP itself was not immune to what was happening. We had actually an office in Washington, D.C. where we employed about 15 people. We had to close that office. We got very close to having to scuttle the organization altogether. And I remember, a couple of things happened during that period of time. One, the organization actually got stronger between 2008 and 2012. And I think it was because people started to band together, that we needed each other more than ever. And in 2012, there was a report that came out by the Pew Hispanic Study Institute. And it had said that Latinos during the Great Recession had lost 2/3 of their household wealth, their median household wealth. 2/3, it wasn't high to start with, but it was a devastating time for everybody in the country. But for a number of reasons, Latinos were hit harder than any other segment of the population. And there were a few things that hit close to home during that period of time. People that I knew were losing businesses, were losing their homes, and were losing their families. And it was a really, really tough time, if you remember. And I remember having a conversation with Henry Cisneros in 2012. And Henry Cisneros, if you guys don't know or remember, was the first Latino to be the HUD Secretary of the United States. He was in President Clinton's cabinet and became a mentor of mine and of our association early on. And I stayed in touch with him through the years. And we spoke in 2012. We talked about that study in particular. And I remember in the course of that conversation recognizing that NAHREP was in a unique position to provide leadership in the area of Hispanic household wealth. Because home equity is the largest source of wealth for most Americans, especially Latino Americans, and a secondary source of wealth for many, many Latino families is small business ownership. And we were an organization that was all about advancing sustainable Hispanic homeownership, but whose members were largely made up of small business professionals. And I remember also thinking that I needed to change the way I looked at the organization. You know, it's so easy in this industry to follow a template. There are a lot of trade associations out there, and they all do fundamentally the same things. Sustainable homeownership is a very worthy mission for our organization. We know as real estate professionals the impact that homeownership has on individuals' lives. We know that people who are homeowners have more stable environments in general. Children of homeowners tend to do better in school. I don't know if you know that. And they tend to have less behavioral problems. So there's many, many positive elements that are associated with homeownership. But during that time, I recognized that homeownership isn't the end game. It is the means to something else. It is the means to a better quality of life. It is the means to wealth building. It is the gateway to the middle class. And it was in that mindset that we created the Hispanic Wealth Project. And we started to put that idea into motion. Hispanic Wealth Project started 10 years ago, but we didn't really formalize it till a few years ago, just like 4 or 5 years ago when we made it its own standalone organization or corporation. Wealth is an important thing. And the process of gaining wealth in itself is not necessarily an end-all either. We released the NAHREP 10 principles where we talked about why it was important to build wealth, to acquire a mature understanding of wealth and prosperity. These are disciplines that as Latinos, only a few of us had exposure to in the past. It was an inspiring time to be a part of that, but it didn't stop there. I remember around 2014, 2015, when we started to get our legs back as an organization. And one of the things that we always did really well was events like this one. We got really good at conferences. And somebody told me, if you want to really see an incredible conference, you got to go see this event called South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. It is a cultural phenomena, is the way it was expressed to me. So I did. I went and visited and participated in South by Southwest. And that event attracts over 100,000 people a year. And it started off as a music festival showcasing the live music scene in Austin, Texas. And it was so successful, they started to think, this is more than just a music festival. This is an opportunity to showcase some of the best and the brightest of Southwestern culture. And it evolved into a tech conference. I mean, think about that for a second. A music festival evolved into a tech conference and then expanded into this media conference that showcased filmmakers. And turns out Austin, Texas has a burgeoning filmmaking community as well. Fast forward a few years, it becomes this iconic cultural phenomena showcasing the best things about Southwestern culture. And when I was at the event, I thought, why don't we have something like that? Why isn't there something out there that showcases the best and the brightest that Latinos bring to this country? Best from a cultural standpoint, best from an economic standpoint. And it was shortly after that that I had the good fortune of meeting Sol Trujillo. And Sol, I know a lot of you know who Sol is now, but I knew of Sol at the time. I knew that he was the CEO of some big company at one time, but I had never met him personally. And I had a chance to, actually go to an event that he was hosting in LA. He invited me to share our State of Hispanic Homeownership report. And he was hosting a very small gathering of about 100 people. And he was sitting down on the stage interviewing a CEO, sharing data about the Latino marketplace and the impact it's having on the US economy, and really trying to educate that CEO. Now, Sol would say that he was trying to inspire him. I would say that he was actually berating that CEO on the stage. And I had a chance to sidebar with him afterwards and introduce myself in person for the very first time. And I told Sol, I said, Sol, that was one of the most amazing interviews I've ever seen. The only problem is that there was 100 people in the audience, and there should have been 5,000 people in the audience. And I have an idea that I want to talk to you about. And Sol and I ended up having a conversation that lasted a little bit more than a year that ended up resulting in what became Latitude and the Latitude event platform, which is where we're at today. And see, we all sort of get, I think, this tunnel vision sometimes, where we look at what has happened before, we follow certain templates and certain patterns, and it's very difficult at times to break out of those patterns. But when I allowed myself to think freely, and trust me, not everybody agreed on the evolution of what NAHREP was becoming at the time. A lot of people who were very close to me told me, Gary, you're losing your focus. We're a housing organization. We're about home ownership. You're taking us in all sorts of strange directions. It's all cool, but it's not who we are. We got to remain focused on what we are. And I said, we can remain focused on who we are, but at the same time, we have to be able to expand that vision and start to take people places that they've never been before. The Latitude event platform became something that was even more powerful than I anticipated, because it's one thing amazing to have a conference, right, where you bring great speakers like Barbara Corcoran and big CEOs and entertainers and media personalities and have conversations about how important the Latino population is to the US economy, to the wealth and well-being of our nation, to the prosperity of all of our citizens. Those are great conversations to see happen live and on stage. But underneath the curtain, I felt, or underneath the floor, behind the curtain, I should say, can't mix my metaphors too much, there has to be something more than that. And so as we started to let Latitude take a life of its own, we started to recognize one of the issues that became more and more a topic of concern and of interest is the whole issue of capital. And we can have a lot of great ideas about Latinos thriving from an economic standpoint. We can talk about entrepreneurship and thought leadership, and we can talk about building great businesses, but the Latino population isn't going to achieve its full potential without a ton of capital. If we don't realize how important that is, we need to take notice of that. Latinos in this country right now, and I'm talking about Latino businesses, receive less than 2% of the investment capital of all the capital that's invested in this country in businesses. Less than 2%. We're almost 20% of the population. 23% of the millennial population, we get less than 2%. There's a report that shows that if Latinos got the same amount of capital as everybody else, proportionately, it would add $1 trillion to the US GDP. So it's not just in our interest, it's in the interest of the country overall. So understanding that, we decided, hey, why don't we start facilitating and matching entrepreneurs with capital sources, with venture capitalists, with all these people who have all this money, but somehow it doesn't get to the Latino population. And let's put them in the same room together, and let's see what happens from there. And quite frankly, not a lot happened. So we decided to start our own fund called the Latitude Ventures Fund. We raised $100 million in 12 months to invest exclusively in Latino-led businesses. And we've just gotten started. And as Latitude continues to evolve, we started to recognize that there are different areas where the Latino factor needs to be magnified, like sports. Now we're going to end this conference with a basketball tournament featuring some of the best Latino basketball players in the United States and from other parts of the world. What in the world does that have to do with Hispanic prosperity, wealth, or home ownership? Well, not a lot, except this. One of the processes, one of the issues with respect to capital is the narrative about the Latino community. The narrative, the perception. Because if I wasn't Latino myself, and I didn't live around a lot of Latinos, and I was able to make my own opinion about Latinos based on what I saw in the media, I wouldn't have a great opinion. I would think that this is a community that's rife with problems. immigration problems, economic problems, health problems, problems with the law. That's the narrative about the Latino community. And if there's somebody out there who has a lot of capital to invest, why would I want to invest in a community that's rife with problems? So that perception matters, that narrative matters. So we have to have conversations with the media, the entertainment industry, and sports. It was one of the most influential platforms, not only to our country, but to our youth in particular. This is a big opportunity for us. And these things are going to continue to evolve. This morning, the Hispanic Wealth Project released a report that showed the primary drivers of wealth with respect to the Latino community. Now, we know home ownership is the largest source of wealth for most Americans. But did you know that the average Hispanic family that has a brokerage account that invests in stocks and bonds, on average, has 10 times the wealth as those that don't? 10 times. I'd never seen that metric before this report came out. And the average Latino family that owns a small business has 5 times the wealth as families that do not. So I have a new phrase. Home ownership is the gateway to the middle class, but investments and small businesses are the path to prosperity. The Hispanic Wealth Project is spawning off different initiatives. We have an angel investor network. So most of you here, I will say without even asking you, have no idea what angel investing is all about. But these are typically the first investors in startups. They're usually pretty experienced and sophisticated. Somebody who invests $1,000 or $5,000 in an idea. But you know, if you invested $1,000 in Uber, at that time, today, that would be worth a little bit over $50 million. Now, I wouldn't put all my money into angel investments, but I would put 5% of my money, and I would learn that process. And most of us maybe don't have the time to become astute angel investors, but you create networks that are led by people who have that skill set, and you can put $5,000, $10,000, $2,000, $1,000 investments in startups that have real promise. So we've built a network where you guys can participate in that. We're starting investor clubs within our chapters starting this year. We're going to pilot that. So it's not just about having events talking about our next deal and top producers and networking. It's going to be, how do I help the people sitting next to me on my chapter board build wealth in a formalized and structured way? This is a platform and this is a vision that we have been waiting for. There are other communities in this country who have been doing this for years. We've been more fragmented than other segments of our population and other communities, but that day ends today. And this vision is for all of us. Some of you may have seen the announcement that came out this week that NAHREP has spawned the National Hispanic Construction Alliance, the very first platform to represent the more than 1 million Latinos employed in the construction industry. And we're about to announce something else called Q4, and I'll just give you a little glimpse. I spoke about it yesterday when I was interviewing the CEO of Freddie Mac. And I talked about the transition that was happening in the industry right now and how there were consolidations in the mortgage industry, mortgage finance industry, that there were companies merging and there was companies going out of business. And that's a cycle that happens every few years in the mortgage industry. But the back end of that cycle is there's going to be a lot of new mortgage bankers formed over the next few years. Brand new companies. A lot of these companies have executives that they were executives for companies that merged or went out of business that are going to be starting their own companies. And we want to start from the very beginning, making sure that many of those companies are Latino-led, and all of those companies understand the opportunity that exists within the Hispanic sector. These are new disciplines that have never existed in the mortgage finance industry, and we want to get to them from a ground floor basis. So this this organization that you're a part of, this organization that you've helped build by virtue of your participation and your leadership with our chapters and the things that you do every day, helping people get into homes and educating them about the process and building wealth in your communities, is changing the trajectory of the Latino community now and for the future. So I want to thank you all for being a part of it. We love you. God bless you.